Imagine a soldier the size of an insect. The ultimate secret weapon.
If you give godlike powers to everyone, it's going to be chaos.
So how do we stop him?
By knowing I. Scott, I've been watching you for a while. You're different. And I believe everyone deserves a shot at redemption. Do you?
Absolutely. My days of breaking into places and stealing stuff are over. What do you want me to do?
I want you to break into a place and steal some stuff.
Makes sense.
Film Board, everybody. Each month, the gang of thugs gathers to take on one film currently in theaters and spoil it rotten. This month, we're taking on the diminutive dynamo in Marvel's mightiest bench-strength hero, Ant-Man, from director Peyton Reed. I'm Pete Wright, and making up the gang this month, we have, joining us from his mansion in the hills, wearing nothing but his wasp wings and a smile, Justin Jaeger.
I'm a tiny, tiny man.
A man whose bite is, interestingly, also often compared with that of a bullet ant, Andy Nelson.
That's me.
And the man whose first text out of the theater was to Evangeline Lilly, wondering if she'd be willing to punch him in the mouth, too, Steve Sarmento.
I can't wait to talk about this. I'm so antsy to talk about it.
Before we get into the film, you should learn more about us at thenextreel.com/filmboard. Subscribe for free on iTunes or follow us on Twitter and Facebook at thenextreel. And be sure to join us over at instagram.com/thenextreel and play Stephen Smart's Instagram, #PonyPrize, #Guess the Movie Challenge. Contests going on weekly. New one starts on Friday. Okay, here we go. Ant-Man. How'd we do as we suit up for our roundtable brief review? Andy.
I had a lot of fun. It was a really enjoyable film to watch. There were some moments that it just kind of a little slow, kind of cranked things down a little bit. But on the whole, I had a good time.
Wow. Okay, good. All right. Good. Steve?
I will have to concur with Andy, although I'd say the film does have some little stumbles, some minor flaws. It was really thoroughly enjoyable. I can't wait to talk Marvel with you guys on this one.
All right, so we're trending up generally, JJ.
Well, I think it's fun and special, but I think I'm reaching a little bit of my fanboy ennui in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I think some of that angst may come through with some of our discussion here.
Really? I was actually worried about you. I think I think that the film for me was exactly as good and cool as Ant-Man is to me. Which is to say, like I say, bench strength, and that's really, I mean, he was an Avenger, yeah, and it was, he can get real small, and occasionally I thought he got real big, but he was not a comic hero that I read much of. And so I don't know enough about him to really be able to judge, where he fits in the canon and how they did there. But generally, I had a pretty good time. My kids went ape for it, so that's got to say something.
Yeah, my daughter, we did her own little flick chart afterward, and it is now her favorite movie, more so than Guardians of the Galaxy or Avengers: Age of Ultron, Frozen, all of those. Wow. I know. I was really surprised.
Yeah, that was the one. They both of my kids were like, "Well, we walked out. We're going to have to go see that again. Should we just buy tickets now? Can you buy those online, Dad? Can you just get those in so we can I'll put it in the calendar." JJ, can you start with just a little bit of background and tell us just a little bit about where this fits and how we're supposed to, I don't know, think about it?
So is your question about cinematic, or is it comic book? Or...
Well, I feel like I need a little bit of both. Is that possible?
Well, it's weird. So the original Ant-Man, Hank McCoy, who we meet as the old guy, as Michael Douglas Hank McCoy, Hank Pym. Hank McCoy is yet another brilliant, snarky character from the Marvel Universe. He was in one of the original Avengers, and when I say original, it's like issue number 2. I think he was originally introduced to everyone, and then now Scott Lang shows up as another iteration of Ant-Man in Avengers 181. So they're starting to play with the timelines of the cinematic universe, and I guess maybe, I'm not sure if our conversation wants to go this way, but maybe we want to talk a little bit about why they're doing that. But they're like, Hank Pym was a contemporary of Tony Stark, and they're making it more that Hank was of his father in the cinematic universe. And now Scott Lang, it's difficult to see how he fits in with the cinematic universe now, but he was used in a lot of different ways in the comic books, and has been, killed off, brought back, and Cassie, his daughter, is killed off and brought back in the comic books. So it really feels to me like they're using this character to set up the table for some story that's going to come later on, which is some of that Ant-Man will return type of thing that's there. I was confused going in that this was the next movie that they were making. But I think, you talked about bench strength, right? You use that word. I think really what they're trying to do here is bring up a character that fits in a lot of the Marvel needs as far as what he can do and who he can be, so that they can use it in whichever way they want to use it going forward with the story as it lines up in the next movies.
Okay, so what is it that gave you angst?
Ant-Man to me, and this is probably my problem, is that I was never really into the Ant-Man superhero, right? But now if I want to separate myself from that in the comic universe and think about what they're trying to do with the movies, I feel like they're kind of sussing out from the Marvel universe a lot of the similar sort of character types that when you were reading the books, if you were reading the books, you were able to sort of choose one and go along. So you've got this snarky superhero character, right? And we've seen it with Chris Pratt in Guardians of the Galaxy. We've seen it with it's basically the idea of who Spider-Man is. They've done it well sometimes, they've done it not so well other times. And another thing is, if you're looking at the Deadpool trailers coming up, that's who Deadpool's going to be to an extreme degree. So you've got that likable, sort of snarky, clever comic person, and then they cast Paul Rudd in this role. So they brought in Scott Lang, who's supposed to be a sort of edgy superhero thing too. And then now you have the other angle of who Ant-Man is, which is that brilliant scientist character in the Marvel universe. So you've got your Tony Stark, you've got Hank
Bruce
Pym.
Banner.
Banner, you've got Hank Pym now, and now you've got and I brought up Hank McCoy because he's another one of those. He was Beast from the X-Men, right? And he's a scientist and he's snarky. So you kind of you start to feel like you've got all this sort of character type that comes through the Marvel universe, which when I was reading the books, it was fine because I chose the ones that I like. I didn't have to follow Fantastic Four because Reed Richards played that in that book. He was the brilliant leader guy in there, but I didn't really gravitate towards that. So I went to the other ones that I liked. What I think is difficult for me now with the movies is they're starting to bring those character types, and they're in all the movies, and they're trying to make through lines, and I'm feeling like I need to pick one. And I don't know that that's possible with the way that they're scripting the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that's kind of where my angst is coming up, in that for Paul Rudd, I love Paul Rudd, and I didn't really like Scott Lang. So that's difficult for me.
That's a really interesting comment. Where do you guys, Andy, Steve, where do you stand on Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, as the superhero? Did he stick for you?
I thought he was great. I mean, I don't have any knowledge at all of Ant-Man or anything having to do with him, with the Avengers, anything like that. I just am walking into it completely blind, and I love Paul Rudd. I thought he was really enjoyable as Scott Lang. I thought he did a good job as this character. I mean, there were times where I didn't completely buy Paul Rudd as the kind of the engineering genius building these little devices and stuff like that. But I kind of let all that slide because it's a Marvel movie, I guess.
It's an interesting casting. It sort of reminds me of, going back to like late 1980s of casting Michael Keaton as Batman. Now, of course, there we're going much darker, but somebody who is perceived as, a comedian. That's what Paul Rudd is known for. And to put him in this action film, is it something he can stretch to? The character, as Justin explained, we do have this snarky side, which I think, Paul Rudd plays very well. And I didn't have any other issues with the performance. I was wondering how well that would play in this film, with the tone of the film, with this expectation of, the humor that he would bring to this role. And would it fit in, or would it feel sort of shoehorned in because that's what he does, that's his shtick, and there would try to just fit it in so that it's the Paul Rudd we all know and love. And to me, it felt, right there with the tone of the film. It felt in place, and I just enjoyed the feel of this film, that it wasn't so heavy as some of the others. And I think that may have to do with the genre of this film that we've talked about before with the Marvel films, of each of these sort of tackle their own genre, and this one has its own genre separate from the others, and I think it fit really well, and I had no issues.
Well, and one more thing about Paul Rudd is he is a very funny actor, and when you're taking a concept of a superhero like Ant-Man, which by nature is pretty silly anyway, I think that you want to find somebody like Paul Rudd who can who knows the absurdity of that superhero and is able to kind of play that in a way that I think makes it work.
That's really the secret and what makes Paul Rudd work for me here too. That he comes off as that comedic everyman, and yet and he does showcase the absurdity of his own powers, I think, really well. I think the suit is ridiculous. The talking to ants is absurd, and yet he sort of normalizes it for me. But I also think it was that whole environment was made so much richer with Michael Pena, who, I mean, every time he was on screen. Made it just that much funnier for me. Like
he was perfect,
right?
Perfect.
He was sort of what I normally expect out of Paul Rudd in movies like 40-Year-Old Virgin. I mean, he was that guy, and I thought he was like, even as it was, I thought he was underused, Michael Pena. So I thought it was perfect. And Paul Rudd, to me, the appearance of Paul Rudd, known so much as kind of an everyman, man, the dude looked good. Right? He was cut. I'm telling you, he worked hard for this movie.
He did, and I say I love Paul Rudd. The angsty thing that I feel with Marvel right now, though, is can't you switch him out with Chris Pratt and Ryan Reynolds? Couldn't any of the three of them play their three different roles? That's the part where I'm starting to get frustrated, because if the actors are interchangeable, am I starting to feel that way about the characters too? So maybe we can talk a little bit about what Paul Rudd did bring to this role, because I agree with all that. I feel like he was an everyman, and I feel like you guys are making really good points about what he did. I guess I'm talking about maybe a more macro thing of like, now I'm starting to feel like the Marvel movies are feeling the same, and that makes me kind of disappointed as a fanboy.
Well, I think that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought it back around to that, because when you first said it, the word sort of diversity came to mind, and I don't mean just like racial diversity, like, oh my gosh, it would be so much better if Ant-Man were Hispanic. It is a diversity of tone and a diversity of just sort of story, and I don't think I ever really had a sense for what was missing until all of the Comic-Con DC footage came out, and you see the stark contrast between what DC is doing in their universe compared to Marvel. And not that one is good or better or worse than the other, and I think DC is facing very much a similar problem of now they're known as the dark comic universe, and that's not that much better, but boy, does it highlight the shortcomings of the other one. Am I on the right track?
I agree. I actually the trailer that we saw for the DC movie is the first time I've been excited about a DC movie in a long time. But the fact that it was a DC movie, and I've always been that way about Marvel, and I'm just starting to feel like we're just kind of hitting the same notes with Marvel now.
Well, I think that's the more of these that they make, that's going to be the battle that they'll be fighting, because there are so many comic book heroes now that trying to find the way to make it stand out as a different type of character, a different type of hero, is going to be that much more challenging.
Well, it also gets to, origin story. With this whole, phase 2 of, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we were past that. It was, we knew where these characters were, we had stories we were developing. This is the first origin story we've had in a while, and I did find myself sort of going over, okay, we've done this before slightly differently. Yes, it's a different film, but at a certain point, it's like, how many different times do you have a hero origin story? You got the big bad, corporation and secret technology, and to me, it felt like a lot of things lifted out of the first Iron Man film.
Why is it that origin stories feel like origin stories in comic books, but as soon as you have enough of them on screen, they really start to feel bland. Maybe I'm taking it even further than you. I'm tired of origin stories. I really am just exhausted of origin stories.
Well, I think Justin got to that point of it may be because they have to put them in the same universe. Well, I don't know, because I was struggling with that with, its origin, but there's references to the Avengers, and we can get into those things. And in the comic books, everything is interconnected. They will reference other, additions and point you there. But I guess there's something in it in terms of the structure of what you can do in a film and what the audience expects for a story to do, and the investment that goes into that, where if you try an origin story in a comic book and it doesn't take off, you can always reboot it again, you can reinvent it, you can bring it into another universe. Here, it's a bigger risk, and maybe that's, what works is what works, and they go with it, and we tweak it around the edges. That's my feeling about it. That's what I see. There's that risk and reward, and I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, is anybody excited about the new Fantastic Four, where they're going to do the origin story again there? No one's talking about it that I can tell. We're not.
Well, I think it boils down to the fact that it's a story structure. It's like we are so familiar now with the story structure of this particular pattern of storytelling. We know how an origin story goes. And when you cram it into a little 2-hour block of time, as opposed to, when in a comic book, you can make it's going to be a 12 arc issues, a 12 issue arc, or however many issues. In a movie, we have that story down now, and we all have that sense that we know exactly what beats we have to hit in order to get to that end climax when they take the mantle of the hero and conquer the villain. And I think that's
Andy,
a big part of it.
I am curious your take on this. When specifically to that point, are we spoiled by Daredevil, the Netflix series? Because for me, when you say that it could be a 12 issue arc, I think, wow, we didn't even see the Daredevil costume until the end of the final episode of that Netflix series. Am I spoiled by the patience that sort of forced me to have? And would I have been benefited by seeing a character like Scott Lang evolve over the course of 12 episodes on Netflix?
I think that's it. I think absolutely the reason that, I won't say that's the reason that Daredevil worked so well, but I think that was a huge advantage that Daredevil had, is they had time to evolve that origin story and let us kind of come to it more with him as he kind of navigated his way there. And like you said, we didn't have to get even to the outfit until the very last episode of that series. Now we've just got, Act 1, we've got to introduce the mysterious scientific thing that is going to happen that's going to cause this person to enter this new world. And then the second act is all about, kind of the good and the bad of now helming this role and confronting the villain. And then having kind of that downfall into the third act where they really kind of have to make the change and become the hero. It's like, we know that story so well. It happens in 2 hours, and we've seen it so many times now. It's hard to do it. It's hard to do it differently.
Well, it is. And this is what's interesting, because just earlier in the week, sat down and watched Unbreakable with my daughter, who's a big, Marvel fan. And we're watching that film. We've done the M. Night Shyamalan thing. We're watched, Lady in the Water and Signs and all of that. So she's like, okay, this is going to be this sort of edgy thriller. And then there's the scene where David Dunn is standing in the train station and people are brushing up against him, and he's seeing these crimes they've committed. And she looks at me and she goes, oh, this is an origin story. This is how he becomes. And it's like that, when that film came out, that was not, I don't know that term was in the common vernacular there when talking about films. So I know she's familiar with an origin story, but when that film ended, she said, I really, really like this movie. And I think part of it is it's a new spin on the origin story. Is that something that, we can't do because we have to give people what they want? If we're going to a superhero film, we have those things, we have those expectations, Andy. And if we gave them something that's a totally, different tone, with like Unbreakable that doesn't clearly tell us that we're seeing a superhero film? Is that going to upset people? Is it not going to, draw in the crowds? That's because I think we can do that.
Well, the bottom line is when it comes to spending millions of dollars to do it, of course they're going to play it safe and give the vast majority of the population what they want.
This is the difference, I think, for me with Unbreakable. I don't even think it's a fair comparison because I am like your daughter. I mean, it was not until the end that I realized, holy crap, this is a superhero movie. Like I didn't know when I first saw it. That was the Shyamalan trick in that particular movie, was that he made a movie that was ostensibly about something very different, and it was a superhero story, origin story, and I loved him for it. That could only be true here if they didn't call it Ant-Man and we didn't know it was Ant-Man, that was the big secret until the very end, and he stands up in the suit and suddenly he can get small. Like that's the kind of unveiling that we need. In this case, we know the story before we even walk in. To Andy's point, we've seen it so many times that, the first hint, the first whiff of the trailer, we know what it's going to be about.
And we all love Unbreakable. So it's easy for us to say, but I think Steve's point makes sense too, is that we think it's so amazing that we realized halfway through that, hey, it's a superhero movie, hey, it's an origin story, but it didn't do well enough to make Unbreakable 2 and Unbreakable 3. Right. So Steve's point is maybe well taken in that they've found the Aerosmith formula to make a pop song here, and they're doing it over and over again because they're making money, and it connects with their universe. I, for one, am getting a little tired of it.
And I think that says a lot coming from you.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed. Yeah. Like I was giddy to see the movie, and because it's Marvel, and I still love when I see their little Marvel thing at the beginning of every film that I see. But it's just I don't really need to see one for a while, I guess.
Well, and I don't want to just because I did have a really good time at this movie, but the biggest disappointment, speaking of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and sort of the Kevin Feige, helmed strategy here, the biggest disappointment that I think I've had over the last couple of months is finding out that Ava DuVernay is not going to be directing Black Panther. And ostensibly because of creative differences, that they're moving in a direction with this character, another bench strength character. I think Black Panther. That's one that I like a lot, but I'm not sure that I'm that is certainly not a Tony Stark level of Marvel character. I don't know. Check me if I'm lying on that, JJ. But
no, you're right.
But I'm really interested. I think it conjures up some really complex issues that we would be able to deal with in the auspices of a superhero movie in a way that I think could have been really interesting. I don't know who the director is that they're putting in there, but I'm worried a little bit about that. When you look at this film. And the controversy getting this film to be made, that this was a passion project from Edgar Wright for 10 years, I guess, and that he left the film for, again, creative differences, to be replaced by Peyton Reed. Is that a sign? What do we think about this? This level of series control, universe control. Is that what's preventing us from getting more complex, more interesting stories?
Well, I think it's that franchise, and these are Marvel films. It's not, you don't have the auteur. It's not a Steven Spielberg film. You look back at all the directors you've got, and we've talked about this before with tentpoles of studios finding competent directors who haven't really created a brand in their name. And I think we've talked previously about who really has the creative reins there, and is it somebody that can manage the director to manage the project with Marvel calling the shots? And as we hear more and more about creative differences, I think we have to look at that in terms of these are Marvel films. These are not the property of a director who has found a script and they're bringing that vision. It's here's this piece. It has to fit into this universe. It has this role to play, and in my perception, they'll find somebody that can competently manage that production. And maybe bring a little bit of their flair and style to it. I think Peyton Reed, there's some of his films I've really enjoyed. There's some that have been complete clunkers, and so there was a lightness to this that I've seen in his other films, and maybe that's there. Then I have to look and see Edgar Wright's, credit, on the script and say, is that, remnants of what he contributed to this before he departed from this project? the role of the director in these films, I think, is very often very different from other films we may discuss, where it's a specific project that a director has sort of shepherded along the way as their own personal project.
What are we missing from Edgar Wright that we really feel like we are genuinely missing? I mean, did any of you guys walk out of this film saying this would have been better if Edgar Wright had done it?
Well, I have to think it would have, just because I love Edgar Wright so much. I think that he seemed to be somebody who was so in touch with Ant-Man. I mean, he shot that demo reel a few years ago that actually helped it get off the ground. I have to think that with him at the helm, it would have really felt like an Edgar Wright film, and it would have really I think there must have been something there that would have made it much better. Peyton Reed, I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't have a whole lot to say about Peyton Reed. I mean, Bring It On, I enjoyed. Down with Love, I enjoyed. Didn't see The Breakup. Didn't see Yes Man. And so he strikes me as a director that seems to be a very much somebody that they bring on to get the job done sort of director.
I think he did a fine job. I wonder, because I walked out. I found myself asking the question, what would I have really loved had this been an Edgar Wright movie? And there were some things in the movie as it stands that felt like Edgar Wright touches to me. Like, for example, every time Pena was telling a story, the way their mouths would move with his mouth, and that got progressively more absurd in his kind of retelling.
That was the best part of the movie.
Yeah, it was really great.
It was really great, and just another kind of nod to that sort of awkward humor that I think was brought to the film.
But do you think that was in there from Edgar Wright's script, or do you think that that's something Peyton Reed brought? I mean,
The Mothership is a fine podcast and from USA Today, and I don't really read USA Today, but the podcast is fine. It's a nerd cast, and they interviewed Peyton Reed, and he was fairly, I mean, it just. He had a really good sense of the humor and of the touches that were in the script before he got there, and of the touches that were Paul Rudd's, and of the touches that were his on set kind of decisions. And so, it was clear that he has an understanding of what came before in crafting the story.
No, I just don't think that, like, he doesn't strike me as a director who, from his body of work, who really has a defined style like Edgar Wright does.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
I guess that's what I was saying, is I just don't see a Peyton Reed style. And to this film, I see almost more of an Edgar Wright style just through the screenplay than I do anything that screams Peyton Reed. And I just think if Edgar Wright was helming it, it would have made it stand out.
It would have been even more of that. I agree. I would hope so. And because I think that Michael Pena sort of thing was the special part of the film. Other than that, it didn't really advance the Marvel story anywhere for me, and it was that sort of the redundant origin story comic book movie. And that was the real frustrating deal there. So if Edgar Wright did the specialness to it, then I would hope that there would have been more of him there too.
I was gonna say it reminded me in some ways like the Thor films, where Justin, it isn't really advancing any larger story, but it's introducing something. And if I have to pinpoint it, it's the little vial of yellow fluid that makes its way off. There's other things that go on, but I know that's the thing to come back, and then end of credits sequence. Okay, we see what's coming. But, with both Thor movies, it was always like, yeah, there's stuff going on, but it was really here to introduce some element that's going to be a major plot point or integral to a future story. And I think those are my two disappointments. It's the film served that function solely, and then, redundant, origin story. So it's almost like a placeholder. Even the scene we have with our little crossover Avengers scene, was kind of, entertaining, but it just still felt like, yeah, there's nothing going on, and we're going to cram this story into a little sequence where there's nothing going on in the larger Marvel universe and move on. And that urgency, that connectedness that we've seen with the other parts of Phase 2 just wasn't there. And it just really, I don't want to say the film was limp, but because it had lots of fun, it had lots of excitement, but just when compared to everything else we've seen in Phase 2, just didn't hold up.
And I think that's an important part. I think if Ant-Man wasn't part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and it was just a standalone, if it wasn't Unbreakable on its own, we'd be maybe saying this is a fun summer movie with some clever dialogue and some interesting ideas. But because we're expecting this sort of next level jump for the Marvel movies, it just feels like that same theme, and maybe that's not enough anymore.
Well, and it's so far. I mean, that may be why we loved Guardians of the Galaxy as much as we did, because it was so set in such a different place that it felt more like a standalone film. It was much more of just sort of a space science fiction film with Marvel tones than a typical Marvel uniformed superhero film.
And something else about this film that we haven't talked about yet that I think is interesting that could have made it really stand out a lot more is using a different genre, the heist genre, to really do something more with it. Like Captain America Winter Soldier, we talked about how that had much more of a kind of a political thriller genre vibe going on in it, which we liked in that film. This one has that heist genre vibe going on in it. I feel like they really could have amped it up, though. And I think if they had brought more of that heist film kind of energy to it, I think that it could have helped pull it away from that origin story rut that it kind of is in a little bit.
That's interesting, because when you bring up you bring up that particularly Winter Soldier, you bring up the Russos. The Russos have much more of a sensibility and a style that I think is really interesting, and the way they handle action, I think, is really interesting, and suspense is really interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to to seeing what they do with Captain America: Civil War. One of the other little anecdotes from Peyton Reed from this Mothership podcast was about having Paul Rudd call him from the set of Captain America: Civil War and say that this is a very different experience. I feel like I'm at the grown-up table.
Well, I think the one that I keep going back to, we keep talking about the difference between a director with a particular style and then the idea of introducing a new character with a particular style too, which I think is interesting if we go back and we look at the introduction movies, because we're talking about introducing Ant-Man in Phase 2, and I know that you guys aren't big fans of the Thor movies, and I mean I'll admit when the Thor movies first came out, I thought it was strange that they were adding Thor at that part too. But you think of who Thor represents as a character, and then you think about Kenneth Branagh being the director of the first one, and what and the differences that it felt there. Now, it wasn't a genre thing, so it wasn't that political thriller like Winter Soldier, and it wasn't necessarily the heist thing. It was just a different movie, and I really felt that when they brought Thor to it. I actually am a fan of the Thor movies, and this one felt like it was a character we've seen before, and a director that didn't have a whole lot of style. Maybe that's back to the Edgar Wright, Peyton Reed discussion, because I think that if they could have held on to that, maybe we would get something really different here. But I feel like they've done it better before.
I would add to that, I was such a big fan of the first Captain America movie. And I think I'm the only one. But I really, really liked it. And I liked it for that reason, because at least it told the story in a different way. Sort of, it was more of a historical drama than it was about, just getting him in the suit. There was a lot of context and a lot of politics and a lot of that sort of humiliation that he felt as a figurehead in a parade. And I loved seeing that part of the captain. And I think that set us up for a much better relationship with that character in every subsequent film.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe if we could look at this movie, if Edgar Wright could have stayed with it, maybe we would feel that way more here. But at this point, it kind of feels like we're judging it against all these other great starts that Marvel has had, and it just doesn't live up to them.
Well, and I just want to say, I mean, we are bagging on it, but I mean, I still had a great time watching this.
It's fun.
Movie,
it's enjoyable.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I really did have a very enjoyable time. I certainly enjoyed it more than Iron Man 2. I mean, it's not like by far anywhere near the bottom of my list. I mean, I enjoy this more than Captain America, which is one of my least favorite Marvel films. But yeah, so I mean, I don't want to feel like it's just we're really getting down on it. But in context of looking at it for what it is as an origin story, I think it is important.
Well, important stuff to talk about it, because I think Marvel has an expectation now. They've set for themselves an expectation that this is a chapter in part of a much larger tale, and in that respect, I feel like we have to judge it against these other films. But I'm with you. I really liked it. I mean, I had a great time. It was a fine film.
Absolutely.
Let's just do a quick rundown of your other favorites from the cast. Can we talk about Corey Stoll? What is up with that guy being so good at being so mean, and
He's so bad.
he's so bad.
So fantastic. He's great.
Is that, Steve, was he your favorite?
Well, it's just, I guess it's like if you're going to find somebody to be unlikable, it's just like I saw that and I go, well, yeah, I mean, it was great. It wasn't the, like Mr. Burns evil, evil, villain. It was, there was an interesting dynamic there. And there was that moment where he's talking with Michael Douglas about, why did you pick me? And, it's because and he says, Hank says, well, because I saw some of me in you. And he's like, why did you push me away? I saw too much of me. And I thought there were interesting moments like that I guess maybe it's the character. I feel like the characters didn't have enough room to breathe in this. There was a lot because of the origin story to get along. And I thought there's an interesting dynamic between those. He talks about, it's like the son he didn't have. And there's these parental relationships throughout this film that gave him as a villain something a little bit more appeal, that I knew it just wasn't the I'm the bad guy. I mean, he plays bad really well, easy to despise guy, but I thought there was an interesting aspect to him.
That's a really interesting observation, Steve, because I walked out thinking I thought it was interesting that he had the balance between kind of I'm going to prove something to Dad. I'm going to succeed where he thought I would fail. Why don't you like me more? Why don't you love me? Relationship with his dad. And I think the complexity in his relationship with, and I'm saying dad, but it's obviously the sort of the assumed parental role with Hank Pym. I feel like that relationship was interesting in a way that the relationship between Hank Pym and Scott Lang was not. And I didn't, there were some pieces of it I just didn't get why Scott Lang was so important to Hank Pym to take on the mantle of Ant-Man. I didn't quite get why he'd been watching specifically him. So I think their relationship, their emotional connection, their relationship was more rewarding for me than the relationship between Scott and Hank.
There's the scene with Scott and Hope in the car. And he talks about, Scott, he knows he's expendable. That's why Hank's pushing so hard for Scott to be the one to wear the suit, not Hope. It's because he knows I'm expendable. And that, why was he watching him? Because, and it's easy throwaway lines like, you're the guy that broke into the thing that nobody could break into before. So, I mean, it's those simple things, but I agree. There's a lot less to hang on in that relationship that, if that's the pivotal relationship in the film that we're going to spend a lot of time with, that there wasn't a lot to it. And that may be the other thing where this film, I don't want to say is feeling hollow, but yeah, there just should have been more there with such, if that's the crucial relationship that's going to carry the story.
Yeah, I thought it. Yeah, I think that's where I am. What do we think about Evangeline Lilly and the? The hope that she brings to a potentially strong female-led superhero film.
I thought she was great, and I did not completely see that coming. I feel like I should have seen it coming. I just don't know enough about the comic world that she's going to be another character in this whole universe, which I think is great. I think she's a good option to choose as somebody to step forward and take on another superhero mantle.
Pete, are you saying there's going to be a Wasp movie?
Well, no. I mean, I don't know that there's going to be a Wasp movie, but there is. But do you know what I'm saying? Like there is. Yeah. He did come out and say that there is a future for Wasp, and she's in a. And she's and what's interesting is that Hope, as I understand, was not Wasp in the lore. No, they've changed it.
And
in fact, Hope's character was like evil. She was the bad guy
really?
as part of her other thing. I don't know what was her name, JJ? Do you know off the top of your head?
Well, it's tough because they've gone back and forth with these things. So Yellow Jacket, for example, which is who we're getting from Cross in this one. Yellow Jacket was actually Pym, and so she might have been Yellow Jacket, or it's tough to tell. But no, she was not Wasp. That's something that's brand new. I can verify that.
So I'm hopeful for a future for her. But I thought she was great. I love Evangeline Lilly. I think she's terrific, and she's just super charming on screen. And to the thought of, I'm with you, Andy. I was a little bit surprised when at that first closing scene that opened, and I felt really dumb because totally should have seen it. It was like telegraphed multiple times throughout the film. Yeah, we just didn't
exactly.
Who else lights you up in this film, you guys?
Well, and how about Judy Greer as the movie mom of the summer?
I love her in everything, so I can't comment on her.
That's just so funny. It's like,
I know you left your other kids at a park, lady. You should be submitted to CPS.
She's going to be cast as those character actors that are known as that guy. She's going to be that mom. You know that lady? She's that mom in the movie.
She's totally that mom.
Right.
Well, yes, and going to Judy, so the Paxton character, right? That's Bobby. I don't know how to say it.
Cannavale.
They really sold his grossness to me in the first 2/3 of the film, and I think the turn that we get at the end with them is kind of special, actually. The fact that he, through the trauma that they experienced together, through all the crises and the climax and everything, that he actually comes to the side and they can work together as a blended family. I mean, who knows if that's going to last, but I think that's new and special. And the fact that just seeing them at the dinner table at the end, and I think he did a good job of that. I think he as an actor turned that character really well in my mind. I didn't expect that to happen. I expected him to be a crap throughout the entire movie and to continue to deal crap to Scott Lang. But I just thought that it was neat that they were able to take that leap and they were able to turn it around. I believed his turn, and I thought I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I agree. I thought I really enjoyed that turn, and that whole last bit. I mean, jumping out of the characters, but into the climactic fight moment. Everything about that last fight I thought was really, just really done really well and in a very fun way. And having Paxton involved in that, I think, worked really well.
How'd you feel about the? Oh goodness, there's so that last bit. I agree with you, Andy, that I felt like that was a turn in the film in a number of ways, and I think by comparison, it made the first 2/3 of the film feel a little bit, even emptier, because I just had such a blast in the end of the film from the infiltration on, when he gets trapped in the thing and finally in the sealed glass fishbowl and finally realizes, I could blow the thing up with my little flappy disks. That's so great. I just had a blast watching that, and but then he shrinks into quantum space, quantum time, and
subatomic. He went
subatomic. That's right. He went. I don't even know how did that hold up for you guys? You feel like you were subatomic with him?
I was afraid that was going to be weak, but I will say that actually they performed the effects and the time in subatomia well enough that I actually, for a moment while I was in the theater, I thought, this might be a big thing about the Pym particle and Ant-Man's relevance to the universe, which in the books it really is. I mean, there is something bigger there, and the fact that they spent, I don't know, what was it, 3 minutes? Probably not even 3 minutes there in that realm, exploring how Scott Lang went there and came back. I actually thought that was a big win for the movie, because it did. I agree with you, Pete. It made the earlier kind of the tropes and the simple stuff at the beginning seem weaker, because all of a sudden it seemed like there was a lot more weight to the film in that short bit of time.
I'm so shallow. I just thought it reminded me of the beginning of Black Hat, where they're going in the computer. Like, I kept going. We're getting closer. I'm like, how small can he get? I kept thinking, how much closer in can we get? And it kept going, and it kept going, and then it blew me away, and it kept getting smaller and smaller, and I was like, wow, he's giving Michael Mann a run for his money.
Oh, really? I can't tell. You're serious about this? You did not think that was fun?
No, I did.
Oh, okay.
It was a lot of fun with that. I was surprised at how far they push it, of how small he goes, because I thought, okay, it's just going to get to a critical point and it just to go to that super subatomic level was interesting. It was a dimension that I didn't expect it to go into. Literally, of just, this is lighthearted, superhero, and all of a sudden we're getting like super scientific, of like quantum levels and quantum reality and all of that. I was just kind of in awe.
There's a bit where they're talking about with the effects team. Peyton Reed is talking about how he went to the effects team saying, we need this he needs to shrink down to nothing. And they said, well, you got to have something, because it's a movie. How much is in your nothing? What does your nothing look like? And so, going into this sort of fractal kaleidoscopic space, I thought at first I thought, man, this is going to feel like Lawnmower Man. I just know once he gets past the dust particles, I'm going to be in a Lawnmower Man kind of a mode. And I ended up coming out of it really sort of fresh and relieved, because they now have, they built into that the mechanics for making him big. And I hope they make him big. Doesn't he get big?
Yes.
That's his thing, right? He can get really small, but he can get really big, too. And
Ant-Man is also Giant Man.
Yes, I want that. That's what I wanted out of this movie. I wanted that to be the big reveal, not a giant ant or a giant Thomas the Train. I wanted him to be giant. I thought that would be awesome. When he comes out of the smoke of the tiny space, had he blown up into this like 20-story man out of the house, destroys the house, that would have been comic genius. And then that's just the end. Roll credits. That's the end.
Edgar Wright would have done that.
See? All right, now you've I've gone into an Edgar Wright rant, but that's what you're right. Now I know what I would have been missing.
I think that Peyton Reed actually did handle it quite well, going back and forth with the normal world and the small world, and even down into the subatomic world. I always enjoyed how the transitions worked, and how even when it was action, how it always flowed, going from size to size. I really was impressed with the effects on all of that.
I really agree, and I was worried about it because, I think we've been, I feel like I've been burned by small scale shooting. The effects that just don't quite work out. And I felt like this worked pretty well, especially you go back into that final fight on the train track, which I thought was super charming when they pull out and show the tiny thing fall off the tracks. I thought that was really great. I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah, that was all perfect.
Yeah. I think, Andy, you often talk about, as an audience, do we know where we are? And when the camera's going, adjusting from, micro scale to large scale and back and forth and moving around in an action sequence, I was always able to track where I was. I didn't lose myself. I wasn't disoriented. And in a lot of action films and fight scenes, it can be really frenetic editing and camera movements. But that was one thing I felt was really well done in this, was to keep us oriented as to where Ant-Man was, where we were, which scale we were, and it just tracked really well. And I thought was really smooth. We didn't have shaky cam. We didn't have, at least I didn't feel unsettled by lots of fast and cutting and anything. They managed that balance very well, I felt.
The cinematography is done by Russell Carpenter. He's got about 45 credits or so to him, and it is it's interesting that one of his credits is The Lawnmower Man.
You're right.
I can't believe that I didn't pull that out before the show, because it would have. I swear to God, that was not a plant. He was also responsible for such greats as True Lies and actually, not kidding, Titanic. And then followed that up with Charlie's Angels and Shallow Hal. So, what are you going to do?
Well, that explains the Titanic joke in the film, then. So there we go, when Scott's cracking into the safe. I have to say, we talked about Michael Pena, but the rest of his crew, I guess all the scenes with that crew just was a great comic balance to that. Because I couldn't place the one guy, the tech guy, the guy on the laptop.
David
And then
Dustal. David Dastmalchian?
yeah, because he usually plays like really creepy guys.
David Dastmalchian? Yeah, he was the super creepy guy in Prisoners.
And he was also the creepy guy in Dark Knight. The Dark Knight, yes. And it's like, here he's playing this comic. Yeah, no, it's just, yes. Not everybody died in Titanic. The old lady lived to throw the jewel in the ocean.
Yes, that was he was great. T.I. Was great. I thought his whole crew, you're right, was just fantastic, and I particularly liked the relationship between Paul Rudd and the crew as sort of the father figure of the crew. You know, I think it was just really, really well played. And you know what else I really liked? We haven't brought up yet. Opening up in the prison. And I think that was an interesting take, and Peyton Reed talks about this, just how important it was to reset your expectations of Paul Rudd by opening on him getting hit, because that's not something Paul Rudd would normally do in a film, and that's to true. Watch him in a fight, but then turn it a little bit and make it kind of this comedic, goodbye moment, ended up being, I think, a really nice touch. So.
Good and unexpected.
Nice to see some of the other regulars kind of float in and out of here. Haley Atwell as Agent Carter, but aged. It kind of surprised me that makeup was a little bit funky. I couldn't tell it was her, but I'm a big fan of Agent Carter, the TV show, so it was nice to see her there. John Slattery already. We've talked about Howard Stark. Garrett Morris as a cab driver.
Well, yes.
That was awesome.
What did everybody think of Michael Douglas? How come we're not talking about him?
Oh, well, that's a good question.
I thought he was great.
Really?
I loved the bit of starting with him as a young Michael Douglas. I actually thought they pulled that off quite well.
I agree, and I love that they set that relationship up, and I loved his history, right? I mean, I love that they gave him the Ant-Man history. I mean, I think they really gave us some great context for why we're starting with Scott Lang. At least this is the part of the timeline that we're focusing on, even though now we know, I mean, gosh, we could pull a Captain America 1 and go back and do an Ant-Man story, another origin story, but we could, because there's an interesting part of history there.
Yep.
So... No, I thought he did great. Why did you, JJ? Did you not think he was?
I thought he was great when he was playing young. I it might be just because I know too much about his current events, but I just worried for him so much. I really didn't want him to get hurt. I found him old and frail in some of the older parts. But when he was young, I thought it was great, and it probably has nothing to do with his performance. It's probably just
No,
you're just looking out for him. He's
transitioned to play grumpy old man very well. He's crotchety old guy, and I keep flashing back to like Michael Douglas from like Romancing the Stone, and it's just this weird generation shift for me to see him as the old guy.
He's Las Vegas.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. Exactly.
Any other particular people you want to talk about? Have we exhausted our means on this one?
I will say, I thought that Christoph Beck actually did a great job with the music for this one. I thought it was very fun. He does a lot of just kind of fun sorts of music, and I thought it worked really well in context for this film.
I didn't notice it, unfortunately, which it was probably fine. It didn't stick out as something more or less to me in what you're saying.
Sure. No, it's one of those things. It's like, it's not maybe the most noticeable, but I think it's effective for an Ant-Man movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Living up to the brand. That's all we care about. Are we at a point where we feel like we should rank it?
Sure.
I think so. Yeah.
God, I wish Tommy were here.
He'd just scream.
We haven't. We should maybe instead of that, we should. I feel rotten for doing this, but I also feel like it's important. Tommy would be here, but he has an incredible. What's the word?
Phobia.
Well, what is the phobia though? He actually sent the word to us, so I feel like it's okay. We're allowed to do this. Myrmecophobia. That's right. Myrmecophobia. He says, that's what a phobia of ants is called. Go with God. That's what he said. And so he has an incredible fear of ants, and that is just fine. But he did make a noble effort. He made it 40 minutes into the film before he gave up and left.
I don't think he left. I think he fled.
He was escorted
itchy
out
and screaming.
from the
Yes,
Ran
which means he
screaming.
missed the ant the size of a dog, which is a real shame because it was a real charmer. So that's what you're missing. That's why Tommy is not here with an Ant-Man song.
Why he'd be screaming.
Maybe between here and now and the time this goes live, we can talk him into doing something custom. Head over to flickchart.com/TNR film board, everybody, and you can see how this film will stack up. We all liked it up to the level of its name, I think, is fair. So is that enough to have it break, let's see, the top 15?
Yeah, we've got 35, so that's pushing it into the top half. So let's see.
Long odds.
I don't know.
We've done some pretty terrible movies.
yeah.
We've done
really
yeah,
terrible.
We've done a lot of bad movies. Okay, first up, Ant-Man or Cloud Atlas.
Oh man.
I think I'm going to just go with Cloud Atlas because it's so much ambition in that film, and it is a very messy film, but they really were pushing the boundaries with that. So I'm going to go Cloud Atlas.
Cloud Atlas.
If I'm gonna look at what I'm gonna sit down and watch again, I'm gonna pick Ant-Man, and I'm gonna have fun. I may be like doing chores around the house. I'm gonna have it on. It's gonna make me laugh. I'm gonna have a good time watching it. I'm gonna enjoy watching it with my kids. Cloud Atlas, although ambitious, is something I may watch maybe once or twice again in my lifetime. I think I just can't. On those criteria, I have to go with Ant-Man.
I think I'm with Steve. It's hard to open on a contested vote, but I think I got to go Ant-Man.
If we're using that logic, if it was the movie that I was going to watch again, I actually would say Ant-Man. I disliked Cloud Atlas. I just have not been super impressed by Ant-Man either. So if that's the criteria, I would give it to Ant-Man.
I think it's also fair to say that our logic very well could change between ranking to ranking. So
exactly.
Yes, it could.
Sure.
Yes, it could.
Right. And I would go with Ant-Man with that criteria too, because it's definitely.
We rank it on importance
we'll
or
give it to
enjoyability or yeah.
It changes. Yeah. It's always different. Ant-Man or Looper.
Looper.
Here, I would actually pick Ant-Man.
Really? I mean, I'm going to pick Ant-Man, but I'm surprised to hear you pick Ant-Man.
Why?
I don't know. Foreheads?
Yes. I needed to see Looper again because the first time I had such high expectations and it just was meh on that. And I maybe need to revisit it, but I just wasn't really that impressed. Yeah, Ant-Man.
Yeah, Ant-Man.
Well, with that, it's already over. Captain America.
It is?
Because Captain America and the Winter Soldier.
It's over.
It's in our top 10 now.
That.
It's over Avengers Age of Ultron.
That is not right.
Yes,
I changed my vote.
No, exposition bunker. Ant-Man did not have the exposition bunker.
Maybe it needed some bunker. That movie would have been better with bunker.
Okay, Ant-Man. Ant-Man or Fury.
Fury. Now I'm on a roll.
I would go Ant-Man. I would go with Ant-Man on this one, but
best job I ever had.
That's right.
Ant-Man or Dawn of the Planet.
Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
I would say, yep, Planet of the Apes. Ant-Man or Prisoners. Yeah, I would watch Ant-Man first, but here I'll vote for Prisoners.
I'll go with Prisoners.
Ant-Man or World War Z.
Oh, World War Z, please.
Yeah.
Z.
Yeah. He's got a thing for zombies.
Mm-mm.
With that, number 9 out of 36.
Wow.
All right, it beat the top 15.
Let's go back in time an hour and tell ourselves, yes, we all have flaws with this film. It's going to make our top 10.
Then we all just hang up. We're not even going to do the show.
What did you do? Who are you people?
I did enjoy it more than Avengers or Captain America: The Winter Soldier. So
and both Hobbit movies and Jurassic World.
Yeah. Well, not more than Jurassic World.
There you go. But
as we say, this is the perils of flick chart.
More than Looper. Yeah.
We also have this thing we don't talk about very much, do we, Andy? We've got this letterbox thing. We should send people
yeah,
there.
it's not like it's a secret.
We
but
should tell people about it because we never
it.
talk about it, but we do like the letterbox, and that's where we've got our the upcoming list of films that we're going to talk about both on the film board and the regular show, the weekend show. So we do our star ratings there. Let's go ahead and do that out of 5.
All right, I would say 3.5.
I'm going to give it a 3. 3.
3, Steve.
I would go. This is out of 5. I think out of 5,
Out of
I'd
5.
say 3.5 is good.
Right?
I'm gonna go 3.5 too. Just a little bit, just a half a star more than JJ. Pretty much every film.
Yeah.
That's gonna be my new thing. Letterbox.com / what? The next reel. Slash the next reel. There you go. So if you're a member of Letterbox, you should follow us there too. We're all over that place. That's it, I think. Where do we go from here, Andy? What's the next film we're talking about next month?
The next film board will be The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, excellent. I do like that, Henry. That'll be a good time.
They're normal sized in that, right? They're human.
They're
sized, not ants.
We should know. Let's just tell Tommy, though.
That's great. We did Aunt and then an Uncle.
And then Uncle.
There we go.
Oh, man. That is so great. I cannot wait for it next month. Thank you, everybody who downloads the show, subscribes to the show. Jump over to iTunes, and if you would, so kindly, please, jump into iTunes, search for this show, and leave us a 5-star rating if you like the show. If you're a regular listener, it really helps other people discover the show, and it just makes us feel good. That's all. That's what it does. Steve Sarmento, thank you so much for being here, as always.
It's always a pleasure, friends.
And JJ, thank you, my friend.
Giant Man tomorrow.
And Andy Nelson, I will I will talk to you in just, it seems like, a few hours.
We're going to be talking a lot.
Oh boy, got some good movies coming up for the regular weekly show. What are we talking about this week on the regular show?
We're going to be finishing up our 1939 series with Only Angels Have Wings.
There we go, finishing up. So again, thank you, Andy. I'm Pete Wright. We will catch you next month on the next Real Film Board.